And welcome back to the Motivating Force podcast. I am host Sway, an aspiring Marine Corps officer. I am currently finishing up my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and finishing up ROTC as well. This is Justin. He is an aspiring motivational leader who is always excited to bring our new topics to the table and share our wonderful ideas with all of our wonderful listeners. Today we're going to be talking about death and different philosophical theories on how to bring death to the forefront of the conversation and use it as a positive source of motivation for your life.
We're going to be using a lot of big names and big words that and they're going to get mispronounced.
They're going to get mispronounced and they're going to be typed correctly on the screen for you, so it could cover our butts.
So just like that awesome intro you guys just watched, make sure you watch the video so that way when you're like, who the hell is he? Oh, that's the name. Oh, I know that person. It's probably not even going to sound close, but we're going to do our best here.
Okay, so to start off, we have this existentialism, which is a philosophical theory that we just finished listening to an hour and a half lecture by Jordan B. Peterson on the Jordan B. Peterson podcast, for those of you who are interested in listening to the same thing. But we listened to this the past week, and it gave us some good ideas on what to talk about. Because it's very interesting, and they correlate it with nihilism and different writers of the time and terror management theory, which is something that I was already interested in. So you have some big points on existentialism. You want to break it down for people?
Yeah, getting into it, we had it was just so awesome listening to the lecture because a lot of the research that was done is dated back to probably about like the 1850s, right?
Yeah.
And we get some Russian philosophers, some psychiatrists, like there's a whole array of people on board with a lot of what we're talking about today. And it's really cool because a lot of the writings and a lot of things they did, you can see it come to fruition in the early 90s about some of the stuff they were talking about and saying what was going to go on. And they were right about it. So there's definitely a lot of credibility to these guys. You know, time has proven them right. And we're definitely interested in butchering those names and sharing their philosophies and their ideas and their findings with you guys. It's really cool talking about existentialism, nihilism, and terror management theory. Thrownness is another thing to talk about. There's just all these different ideas where we pretty much create the worst situation possible and see how that drives humanity forward.
Yeah.
And boy, does it drive, right? So how do we take something from nothing? Or do we take this dread or this fear and we make these really great advancements and just this really hot motivation on an individual
level?
level?
That's where it's important, because for those of you that are actually on this podcast for a reason and looking to benefit in your life and find that structure for yourself, it's a great turning point that if you've heard of existentialism before, you might be that type of person that just hears it and you think of like existential crisis, like, oh, why are we here? What are we doing? And then you're just the person to cry about it and sit in the corner and not do anything with your life. But what we're trying to preach is like, use that knowledge that we're about to give you in a positive manner and boost yourself into doing something positive with your life. Like, make something of yourself. You know, leave like a legacy behind.
Sorry, I was just super enamored by the guys that did all this research originally and came up with all these terms. So I just had to get that out there and share that first coming into it, get that credibility across the board. But talking about existentialism, it focuses a lot on the actions that people perform instead of the beliefs or what they say. So when we talk about, you know, actions speak louder than words, this is kind of more of the origin of that. But the idea is that it's not focused around using that as a flaw. We're not saying that as people are, you know, back and forth or, you know, however you want to put that. But they use the example of riding a bike. And they say it's easier to watch somebody ride a bike and learn how to do it that way instead of somebody explain to you how to ride a bike.
I remember that example, that it was something about like it's harder to explain how your body is actually doing it than to actually do it.
Right.
Because it's using different parts of your brain and the logistics of it all.
So there's that idea. So it doesn't take it in the negative light that we typically coin that phrase to be today. They also use this as an example to show people that you need to align what you say with your actions, because then you create less paradoxes in your life, is how they put it. And with these fewer paradoxes, you're able to like manifest a stronger, grounded self, and it's going to give you a lot less strife. It's going to help you build character, and it's just going to really be a lot better for you when you're able to align your beliefs and your actions. And then, of course, that is talking about it in the term that we talk about it today. Getting into existentialism specifically and why it's really important when we talk about motivation, existentialism kind of comes from a psychopathology that suggests that life is full of intrinsic suffering and misery, and that all that's built into the human experience.
Yeah.
So it's saying you're never going to get rid of it. There's going to be some really miserable days. There's going to be some days that are going to be really anxious, really fearful, really painful. And it's intrinsic to our human nature. It's nothing that's unique.
Yeah, it's nothing targeted to the individual. It's not like just because you're having a bad day, the whole world's out to get you.
Yeah.
Like, it's going to happen regardless. Life is full of ups and downs. You've heard that term thrown around everywhere. But it's like you can't take it too, like, strong to the heart. You got to be able to just ride past that and understand that it's part of being a human. Nobody's going to be able to live a perfect life where it's just always sunshine and rainbows.
It really got me thinking good on the existentialist side of things, because obviously a lot of that makes sense. You know, it is like psychoanalytics and things like that. So it's obviously stuff that has been proven over time. It's research and a bunch of things compiled together. It's not really, you know, looked at as like this belief system. It's more so understanding human nature and the way that we react and respond to things. And this is kind of important coming up to us talking about terror management theory because of the relation to it. So we typically go about our time and we think about this misery and this suffering and these things that happen to us. And when it becomes a little bit too much, we tend to complain about it or find it unique, just really create a fuss about it. That's when we start doing something, is once that suffering gets a little too much, we may or may not do something about it. But leading into terror management theory, obviously we're talking about the next level here. You talk about suffering, you talk about terror. It's a very strong word. So as we transition away from the thought of us having all these negative impacts in our life that are going to be there no matter what we do, then we get to a little bit of a more extreme case of it and see how people react.
When we start bringing up the term terror management theory, what's the one thing that everybody's the most terrorized by? Death. Everybody is scared of death. Don't tell me you're not, because you don't, like, it's the lack of knowledge of what's on the other side of that door, right? And then this was actually popularized by the anthropology. Oh my God, why can't I talk?
Hey, remember that thing we said where we're going to put the word on the screen because you boys can't speak English?
Here, I'll read it, and then we can just kind of put it right here. So, anthropologist named Ernest Becker. He had a book that was a Pulitzer Prize winning in 1973 called The Denial of Death, right? So, he was talking about how, like, it's an inevitability. Oh, my God.
It's almost like we don't do podcasting, man. Come on, what's up?
Inevitability. Jesus. I think it's just my problem that I can't talk. Okay, where you can't stop it. It's gonna happen. People are gonna die, right? And that brought up a bunch of things, and how it's the terror that's so absolute, and the annihilation creates such a profound and albeit subconscious anxiety in people that they spend their lives attempting to make sense of it. Makes sense because now when you look at it, hindsight's 2020. Look at what everybody's been trying to do in 2020, right? The fear of the possibility that you can die at any moment by anyone, anywhere, right? People start making drastic changes to their lifestyle. People start making drastic changes to, the way that they carry their businesses. And this all comes down to how they manage the terror, right? Now, COVID could be this invisible enemy. So the way that they managed that was by going full force, like, laws and restrictions to being close to people, right? So that's just an example. I'm just trying to
No, it was great because there was something in the lecture that stuck with me about that when we talk about 2020, and I've always mentioned it before, how the scare factor. And this is where that evidence comes in on the psychological level, which I really enjoyed listening to, because they were saying that, throughout the course of evolution, we've always had something to be terrified of. So we've always been in a safe space surrounded by a not safe space, or a known versus an unknown. And as we progress through time, through society, however you want to look at it, we have always developed under that mindset. We've always had a known versus the unknown on the outside. So if we really did spend all this time and all this hard work creating the safe space for us, we're going to find an unsafe space outside of that. We're going to create one.
Yeah, we need a common denominator that's like the enemy.
Yeah.
We need something to be afraid of.
Yeah, essentially that's what it is. And on the psychological side of it, showing that you're never going to be able to escape that. And then, of course, going back to that intrinsic human experience of misery and suffering. If you are living that perfect life, if you do create this beautiful structure for yourself and you're going to live in a bubble forever, you're going to find a way to come up and theorize something that is going to be terrifying for you, because it's part of our human nature.
Going back to how death is that unknown, terror management theory talks about how cultures in general have these stigmas and how they adapt by using escapism and being afraid of the unknown that you're talking about, that they start to make cultural beliefs at a certain point, and then it starts being ingrained in society. Things like different beliefs on afterlife, or religion itself could be that form of escapism, or that form of trying to convince people to not be so terrified of the end.
Yeah.
Right? Or using things like reincarnation. It'll be fine because when you die, you just come back to life as something else. So it's trying to calm
so technically
civilization.
You don't die.
So it's why do you need to be scared of it at that point? But it's society in general, or different civilizations coming up with the means to manage that terror of their safe space.
I did actually make a similar connection when we talk about religion and terror management and just general beliefs that people have.
Well, this is where it gets tricky, because this is where it can start to be controversial.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
We're going to stay away from that. Here's what it is, though, because on terror management theory, what we see from some of the research is people tend to get really materialistic when they get brought up with their death. And they try to hoard. And it's not stupid stuff like toilet paper. It's resources. They want that legacy. They want the thing to leave behind. So people will try to, get a lot of money, get a lot of land, just resources, not necessarily for themselves, just for future things to come, right? For their kids or something like that. And it's really interesting because we see that materialistic side of it. And then I look at the other end of the spectrum when we talk about terror management, because that's how nihilists, for example, right? People who don't believe in anything, right? Nothing's going to happen. You're going to die and that's it. You're part of the world cycle, right? And that terror management builds that materialism. But now, how do you look at it on the other side, where the other people are happy in terror management? You look at super religious people who death isn't the end. There's something to come after. So what's the point? And you look at people who are truly religious, not on TV, nothing like that, right? We're talking about your grandma type of religious, and they don't want to own anything. They don't want anything. They go the complete other way. They get rid of the materials. They don't need it. They know there's nothing there for that because everything is in the afterlife. Another way of management.
Or what about like a little branch off of religious people, and we're talking about cults. People that are in cults usually have that like mass death scenario because they just kind of give everything to it. That's their way of dealing with it because they're expecting something to come from that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And it's the expectance of the things that you're going to have in the afterlife that you eventually get to the point in this life where you're like, okay, we're done. You know, I don't need to own anything. I'm going to give everything away. I'm doing this, I'm doing that because nothing's coming with me. And you have people that can accept that, aka super religious people. You know who else really accepts that? Heavy psychedelic users.
I can see that. Because then they start envisioning the afterlife or this other dimension coming to them, right?
Yeah, and they feel like there's something more after death because of those visions. So what do? They don't own a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah,
you really think about it. Think about your average hippie. I just found it interesting connection there between how you have truly religious people and you have the psychedelic users who come to this really convincing stage in life that something's going to happen after you die. They don't want anything.
Well, the whole reason why I wanted to like start looking into terror management theory is because I found it interesting as well. But taking a step back, how since death is something that only human beings like are aware of, like no other animal or creature on this planet knows that they're going to die. Maybe they know that something might happen to them that could hurt if they do something stupid, but they aren't aware of their death the same way that we are as human beings, right? And that might be broken down to explaining like that's what consciousness is. Like that's the root of conscious, is acknowledging the end of oneself, right? But I like seeing the evolution of one's life pattern, right? When you're a child to as you get older. Once you start getting closer to the possibility of death, right? Because you're a kid, people talk about dying and all this stuff, and you're like, yeah, whatever, that's so much farther away, right? But then you become an adult, start getting back problems, your legs hurting, you have to be in a wheelchair, you get sick, you could die. So then like as you progress through life, you start making all these changes for the ones before. Well, there's two types of people. There's like the grandparents that are looking out for the family, or there's the older people that are just like, I need this legacy for me, right? It needs to be huge. Wink. But usually they try to like leave the life for the previous or for the upcoming generations, so then they don't have to struggle the way that they did.
Yeah.
Right. And I liked looking at terror management theory in that perspective, because that's a great form of motivation for them. You know, you can live life basically to the fullest, but then still give to your family or give to others.
See, I like this topic a lot because it really does show on our character side how you do have more of that positive outlook on humans in general than I do.
Yeah.
Because of that direction that you take with it compared to the direction I take with it. So
it's funny.
Really cool.
It's funny that you're saying that, because I was just talking to my girlfriend how I've lost a lot of faith on humanity this past weekend when, I was spending my birthday in Disney. Side note, or not Disney, I'm an idiot. I don't even know where I'm at. I was in Universal Studios Orlando, and I don't know, dude. I lost so much faith in humanity. People are so much like sheep when they go out to theme parks. But that's a story for another time. But yes, I like to have good faith in humanity, but I was just let down one day.
Oh, that's cool, because you see it that way. I see it as that materialistic viewpoint of just gaining things, even with it being resources, that it's like, in the way though that it's kind of detrimental to other people. We saw that a lot from the studies in the book that came out on terror management theory, where a lot of the research they did actually had like steeper punishments for people when they talk about judges that were put in controlled situations involving terror management theory, and how like they would find people more extensively after they were confronted with surveys that talked about their own death. And it was just really interesting on that viewpoint, because I almost thought it was going to go the opposite, talking about having that positive side, where it's like, well, once you're confronted with your own death and it's brought up to the forefront of your mind, you're going to be like, you know, a little more forgiving when somebody steals a candy bar, because it's like, well, you know, we're all going to die, so let them eat the candy bar. But it goes the other way. And instead of like a minimum punishment, it goes to the maximum punishment. So it's really interesting how those things change in people's minds.
Yeah, I was watching a video where this guy was breaking down basically terror management theory, and how there was this study using subliminal messaging where people would just watch something on the screen and then like they would flash the word death, but like for milliseconds, you know, so like you can't even catch it, but your subconscious does. And then they were like, they saw how some of them that were that they were exposed to that subliminal message, and then the control group that wasn't, the ones that were exposed to it were more like motivated to do something with themselves, and they changed the answer that they gave at the beginning for like what they plan to do with their life. You know, so like I just want to be a cop, or I just want to be whatever. At the end of seeing those subliminal messages, they're like, oh wait, maybe I got to change that answer, then, you know, do something more or do something less dangerous. I just thought that was pretty interesting, just because the word death, or like that subconscious thought of dying. And again, these topics aren't negative or positive. We're just talking about it as the theories that they are, and how you should be looking at it as, what am I going to do to better my life now, instead of waiting 20 years because death is so far away. You know, act on it now, like we were saying for New Year's resolutions. When you have goals, achieve them now.
Yeah, if you're waiting for your death to come before you start doing things, it's probably just a little bit too late.
A little bit.
Just a little bit there. So getting into butchering names here, we're going to be talking about this fine gentleman, Dostoevsky. I almost feel bad for saying it. I don't even want to say a name. And I promise you guys, I've listened to this name be pronounced more than a dozen times, and it's just not happening. I don't know. I'm sorry. But he has a great quote, a couple of them actually, that he says, "I hold no brief for suffering, neither for well-being. Let it come as it may. Suffering is the sole origin of consciousness." Really stuck true with me when we talk about everything we're talking about today. Because, again, going back to the roots of terror, fear, anxiety, depression, suffering, pain, all these things that we are all too familiar with. And something from his studies that he liked to research a lot through was how we respond more to the pain, to the suffering, than we do to positive rewards.
Yeah. No pain, no gain.
Yeah.
What you mean? That's how I live at the gym.
Yeah.
I don't know I got a good workout until I feel the pain.
Yeah. So it's just interesting seeing how, you know, the negative can be more powerful than the positive reward of things. And the way that Jordan Peterson put it is that we can definitely be 100% dead, but can we ever really be 100% happy? Really made sense to me, because, you know, for people that do suffer from depression, and I know a lot of resolutions, and even, you know, I know we're getting further away from January, but just in general, right? People just want to be happier. And what does it take to be happy? What does it take to be happy? And like, they'll go online and they'll watch these videos of people who are being happy. Just because they're laughing, smiling, you know, they're on a boat, they're doing something that involves a lot of money, they're having fun. Does that mean they're happy? Does it mean they're 100% happy? No, it doesn't. And people look at that and they strive for that so much. And people that, you know, are going through their mundane lives, living day to day, just doing what they do to get by, and go online and feed off of all this like positivity that's out there to kind of like supplement in their lives. And that's the part that really gets me, is that people do spend that time to kind of like live vicariously through these internet celebrities or just people in general to be like, oh, that's happiness. They have to see it because they don't think they'll ever feel it. And then it's like, you're never going to be 100% happy. So you got to take the doses as they come.
And then that ties back to like what I was talking about before. It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, you know. Then that's something that it could lead down the rabbit hole of maybe social media and like technology is evolving quicker than we can process it as humans. And I always talk about that, but it's because the same way that news and like, especially the past year, we're just so familiar with this. But negative news has become this like fear porn. We're so attracted to what's the worst possible scenario because that's human instinct, right? Like even back, let's say we're cavemen, right? You focused on the bad. Where can I die? And then you avoid it, right? And then just keep living your life instead of just focusing on how can I be happy? But then as we evolve and have civilizations and all that, that starts to change because like you said, how can you truly be happy? You're always going to try to like compare your life with other people when you're on social media. And that's when it starts negatively affecting your life because then you start saying you're not happy when you could just focus on being happy.
I just want people to do the stupid stuff, you know? If you're in that mindset or you're depressed, you're anxious all the time, and I don't know, like just doodling in a notebook, it makes you happy for even like a couple minutes, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I really want people to take some time to get that 5% of happiness.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't know, it was just a resonating message with me where we won't ever be 100% happy, but we'll definitely be 100% dead one day.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do until then?
But then there was something like when we were talking before we started recording, and it's the like concept of like, I just want people to challenge themselves. I don't want you to sit in a corner and cry about like, why am I alive? What's my purpose? Like challenge yourself, do the things you're afraid of and overcome the fear. Like when I was talking about skydiving, you know, your body naturally does not want to jump out of an airplane at 50,000 feet in the air. It does not. Don't tell me it does. But challenge that fear, try to get that adrenaline rush. It'll make it, you know, feel a little bit more pleasurable, but, you know, like overcome the fear. That's the whole purpose that I'm trying to relate to people.
So he wants you to face it head on, and I just want you to be happy while you're doing it. There you go.
Well, when you face it head on, there's a possibility you can be happy.
Yeah.
Instead of the person crying in the corner.
Well, with changes and challenges, you know, St. Paul said, only one shall attain the goal. Getting a little quote heavy, but that's a really interesting point when we talk about challenging ourselves, especially when we focus on terror management theory coming through existentialism and this type of mindset, this type of upbringing, kind of remembering where our motivations kind of stem from originally. And they talk about this in multiple religions because we can see this relation to how we are like akin to deity, right? We're in the image of God. So we have that singular purpose, that singular path. And I'm bringing this up because you mentioned about people wondering like, oh, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose of life? Sit in a corner and cry about it because they can't figure it out. And I don't remember who said it. It was a writer, so not super important person, right? But they said, how bold of you to assume you have the right to ask what the purpose of life is. Through all the research we've been doing on these topics, it's all about you. It's about your happiness, your struggles, your suffering, and as much as it is about only you can go out there and do these changes for yourself, nobody can come along and help you with it in that sense. You got to do it for yourself. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you have to understand that there's really not a whole lot about it that's going to be unique.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Well, I just wanted to recap real quick because when I talk about like existentialism and people going like, why am I alive? The existential crisis thing. It's existentialists, they coined the term, or however you want to call it, the existential angst, which is the sense of disorientation, confusion, or anxiety in the face of apparently meaningless or an absurd world. Like, it doesn't make sense to anybody because we're going to have pain, we're going to be miserable, then that doesn't make sense to you, because if we're created in the image of God and he wants us to be happy, why would he put us through pain? Right? So then they have that angst of, why am I here then? Right? But then, like you're saying, the journey is for one's, like, it's your own journey. So you should be able to overcome that little angst, just like you do in your teenage years. Stop rebelling against your parents and just start your career, start your path, start your goals, whatever it is.
Yeah, we think angst is something that does stop after the teenage years, right? But I think it's just something that we just stop expressing after the teenage years. We still get those thoughts and those emotions that come through us because, well, why wouldn't we? And we're kind of brought up in a world, and again, talking about the technological side of it, where we are pretty much not allowed to talk about these negative emotions. Like, just no negativity at all. And it's such an inherent part of being a human. This is why there's such a big push on how technology is anti-human.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I don't think it does go away when you get past your teenage years, because why else would we have a midlife crisis? Yeah. That's like what I was saying about like the evolution of your life, that you get to a point where it clicks and you're like, oh, I got to do something now. But then on your end, where you were talking about materialistic, people get the sports cars, they get the like new golf rig or whatever it is that they're into. Then you're like, oh, something clicked there.
Your whole life isn't on Instagram. It's not on Facebook. Everybody's not watching you to see how happy you are all the time. So when you have that depression, that anxiety, that suffering, whatever you're feeling that day, just embrace it for what it is. Because especially if it's a negative emotion, as you can tell through extensive research throughout the ages, a lot of people with some pretty big brains tend to agree that the negative emotions are intrinsic to our human nature. It is some of our original qualities. Just take them for what they are. Embrace them, Make the changes that you need to make to come up from that, of course, because you should always use that as motivation to do the next best thing, right? Even for yourself, speaking about that, right? And just, of course, do your best to be happy. Do what you need to do to be happy. And that's going to involve confronting those negative emotions to transform them into the type of person you want to be, the type of characteristics you want to have as an individual.
All right, so thank you everybody that's listened this far. We appreciate you and all the hard work that you guys are putting in spreading the word for us and putting us out there and sharing us with your friends and family. If you haven't yet, you can follow us on social media, Facebook and Parler at The Motivating Force. We have an Instagram at PodcastTMF. Also wanted to do a huge shout out. If you guys enjoyed the new intro that we have, that was done by Daniel over at Vespertine Apparel. You can follow him on Instagram as well. He also has a merchandise page on the interwebs, vespertineapparel.com.
Yeah, it's awesome being able to work with Vespertine Apparel because he's all the way on the other side of the world. And it's just great knowing that we're getting out there. We're getting that reach. And, he's listening to this right now. Well, you and me are asleep.
And that's mind-blowing, isn't it?
It's great, man. Sometimes that internet can be anti-human, but I don't know. Works for us sometimes, right?
It's a great feeling regardless. But again, episodes come out Mondays and Wednesdays at 8 a.m. EST.
And until next time, go and get